2,000 men were allowed to cross the channel unopposed this week, but finally the government managed to stop one man coming here from France, ironically because of his anti-immigration opinions. This is French philosopher Renaud Camus. I think my uncle drives a Renaud Camus, who is now banned from entering the UK because his opinions have been deemed a threat to society. I don't know, I think the thousands of men coming across the channel from violent misogynistic medieval cultures might be the threat to society. And Camus is a civilised man with interesting ideas that deserve scrutiny. Here he is, a 78-year-old gay man who looks like he was beamed here from a dream sequence in a Charles Dickens novel. If he'd just said he was 16 and fleeing Syria, the government would have chauffeured him straight to an ibis instead of banning him. The reason Camus was banned is because he came up with the Great Replacement theory. This is the idea that native populations in Europe are being replaced through immigration, and this is happening by design. This has become hugely controversial, mostly because some people said the Jews are behind it, and other people have cited it when committing atrocities, such as the massacre in New Zealand. Our government told Renaud Camus, your presence in the UK is not considered to be conducive to the public good. I don't know, I think the presence of the government in the UK isn't conducive to the public good. I'll get to the claims of anti-Semitism in a moment, but Camus is clearly appalled by any violence that claims to be inspired by any of his ideas, but why should he be banned over it? We've seen horrific mass murders of children in the West committed in the name of Islam, and we don't ban Islamic clerics or stop mosques being built. Anyone can come across the channel on a boat, no background checks, no weapons searches. Britain has completely open borders. Terrorists, paedophiles, criminals are all welcomed in by our government. The Manchester Arena bombers were brought here from Libya by the Royal Navy. So I don't trust the government to decide who should be allowed in for my own safety. And this guy doesn't look like he's going to blow up a concert. He looks like he's about to give me an F for geography, or he's popped up in a PlayStation game to give me a clue for my next quest. And the Great Replacement has been discredited as anti-Semitic, but Camus himself didn't ever say it was being perpetrated by Jews. I think what's happened is some weird fringe crank said, it's the Jews, because there are people out there who say everything is the Jews, and the establishment went, brilliant, we can use that to smear this whole theory as anti-Semitic and make it go away and call anyone who mentions it a far-right bigot. But the idea that Jews are behind the Great Replacement doesn't pass a basic sense check. This is the idea that European populations are being replaced by non-European immigrants, particularly Muslims. Why would Jews in the West want to import tens of millions of people to the West who historically have slaughtered them and driven them out of so many countries? Jews are the canary in the coal mine when it comes to the rise of Islamism in the West, as they're the first target for violence and intimidation. We can see it now with the rise in attacks on Jews since October the 7th. No, the people who are behind mass immigration to the West are the far-left Guardian-reading establishment who openly despise Western civilization, say they want to abolish whiteness and decolonize Europe of native Europeans, and have allied with Islamists in places like Iran to overthrow governments. It's not a conspiracy, it's all said in the open. It's taught in schools and in HR training courses. The left-wing establishment is openly bribing men to come here with free fancy hotel rooms, free money, free phones, free lawyers to ensure they get to stay forever, a thriving underground criminal economy to work in, and laws that force the native population to say, this is fine, or they go to prison. Speaking of which, I'm definitely not suggesting there's anything bad about this, of course. That would be a thought crime. Diversity is strength, and I'm sure Britain will just carry on getting stronger until we reach maximum strength. Now, Labour politicians say that Camus' theory is a far-right conspiracy theory, but the trouble with far-right conspiracy theories is they've got a habit of coming true, like the Wuhan lab leak theory or Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Is there any evidence supporting Camus' theory? Like maybe an admission by a politician that mass immigration happened by design, maybe as some sort of open borders experiment? Well, yes, there is. Keir Starmer said it.
The Independent Office of National Statistics has conducted vital work on the state of immigration and found the previous government were running an open borders experiment. Failure on this scale isn't just bad luck. It isn't a global trend or taking your eye off the ball. No, this is a different order of failure. This happened by design, not accident. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalise immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders. Global Britain. Remember that slogan? That is what they meant. A policy with no support, and which they then pretended wasn't happening. And now they want to wave it away with a simple, we got it wrong. Well, that's unforgivable.
But look, it must still be a conspiracy theory, because if it wasn't, there'd be data showing the native British population dropping while immigration rises, particularly the Muslim population. Oh, look at this. In 1950, Britain was almost all, well, British, but now it's only 75% white British. So is anyone replacing these native British people? Well, people from overseas are, just like Renaud Camus suggested. And this shows the proportion of the British population made up of first and second generation immigrants rising to almost 25% from pretty much 0% over the same period. So from close to zero all the way to 25%. And what about Muslims? In 1951, there were only 22,000 Muslims in the whole of Britain, or 0.04% of the population. I'll use 2021 as the end point for this measure, as that's the year of the census. So we've got data on how many Muslims there are in Britain. Well, ones that are here legally and filled out the form that came through the door anyway. In 2021, there were officially 3.9 million Muslims in the UK. That's 6.5% of the population. This chart shows the increase. These are official government figures. Is it a far-right conspiracy theory to notice them? Bear in mind the whole world is in a panic about atmospheric carbon dioxide, and we're pumping trillions into stopping carbon dioxide emissions. You know what percentage of the atmosphere was CO2 back in 1951? 310 parts per million. So for every million gas molecules in the atmosphere, 310 of them were CO2, or 0.03%. Carbon dioxide in 2021 made up 415 parts per million of the atmosphere, or 0.04%. Now look, I'm not saying it's not devastating for penguins or Bangladeshis or whatever, but all this panic is over CO2 rising from 310 parts per million to 415 parts per million. That's an increase of about 34%, and still pretty tiny relatively in the atmosphere. But over the same period, the number of Muslims in Britain rose from 22,000 to 3.9 million. That's an increase of 17,636%, and the rate seems to be increasing, almost doubling in just the last decade. And what if we extrapolate to 2100? That's 75 years from now. Look at these trends. 0% British people. You think it's unrealistic? So did I. And then I thought, where are the Christians in the Middle East now? Tunisia is like 0.02% Christian. Look what's happening to the Christians in Syria right now. They're being ethnically cleansed. We're warned about the devastating effects of climate change, but what about demographic change, cultural change? Could that raise the temperature of a society? There are plenty of countries that were Christian and are now Muslim. Look at Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. Did they all just transition smoothly to Islam? Nope. And they were Christian societies that were strong, true believers. They had some strength to resist. Britain today is a fragmented mess of fat, narcissistic morons who've been taught to despise their own history, their own culture, their own race. That tribal thinking in every other culture, the native British people, is to be celebrated and encouraged with community leaders. But if British people show any unity, then that's white supremacy and must be stamped out using the hate crime laws that seem to be exclusively wielded against the native majority. It doesn't really matter if it's a conspiracy theory or not. The purpose of a system is what the system does. You've got to ask, what are the motives of the establishment in running the country like this? Anyway, the ban on Camus is a classic example of the Streisand effect. In 2003, Barbara Streisand tried to suppress the publication of a photograph of her house in Malibu and inadvertently drew far more attention to the photo than if she'd just done nothing. Because of this ban, far more people are finding out about Camus' ideas, and Camus is appealing against the ban with the help of the Free Speech Union, so hopefully he'll be able to come to the UK and speak, and if not, he can join the rest of the 30,000 fellas who've just sailed across the channel under Labour. I'll give the final word to Camus himself. 3 things in Great Britain are even worse than I thought. 1. The extent of the change of the people in civilization, the Great Replacement or genocide by substitution. 2. The crushing of freedom of expression, particularly on one. And 3. The extent of social communism, what Heidegger called American communism, that false and unbearable immediate industrial intimacy marked by the now sole reign of the first name. The civilization of first names. People no longer have names because they no longer have a history and no longer have a race. And this is obviously one of the conditions of one. I'm not sure what that was all about. But anyway, thanks for listening, and don't share this with your friends. Most people are still too terrified of being called a far-right bigot to face reality. And if you want to see all my stuff and get access to exclusive content, you can join a growing community of the only sane people left in the West on my Patreon. There's a link below. Okay, thanks for listening. I've been Leo Kears. Bye. Bye-bye.